anything or just imagined it. I didn't know. All I knew was I was in the cold sweat.
Good evening, all my creatures, creeps, cretins, and ghouls. You're here with another episode of Zounds from the Flipside with your friend, Dr. Zombo Whippersnatcher from Dr. Zombo's World. And we got a very amazing guest, a trailblazer, a true Renaissance man of his time. Somebody that I would like to know so closely, but this is the best I can get for right now. And I want to introduce him to you, Stuart Swezey.
Hey.
How are you doing, Stuart?
Doing all right here, Doctor.
I'm going to put you on the spot for a brief second. I want everybody out there to know, if you didn't, tell the man happy birthday. It was his birthday a couple days ago. Couldn't help myself.
Much obliged. Yeah. Got through another one.
Right. At least I'm not bringing out like the Applebee's crew to sing shit to you, so you're all good. So, for you out there that don't know, and for you that do, this man has been a trailblazer. Ever since the early 80s, he came up with this amazing vision that has blown my mind. He decided to take all the poor fucking punk kids from getting their shit beat up in LA and bust them out to the Mojave Desert and started something called Desolation Center.
Are you cautious at all about playing out in the desert?
Cautious? What does cautious mean?
I had my set of like sticks I would play with, but that got all lost in the sand.
I immediately understood the element of danger and the element of feeling alive are actually connected.
Blix almost seemed like a shaman, you know what I mean? And there was that feeling of shared experience, and there was that feeling of almost a trance-like state.
From someone who rejects all religion, yes. It was a religious experience.
Center. Would you like to tell us a little bit about Desolation Center?
Yeah. All right. Well, that was a good intro. Basically, I was part of the punk rock scene, but also I think there was a lot of experimental music that was part of the punk rock scene at the same time. People banging on metal percussion and, all kinds of approaches to music. And I think what brought it all together was that it was rejecting the commercial mainstream, and it was noisy. It was, kind of confrontational in one way or another. And what I found is that it was also kind of transcendent and psychedelic and maybe didn't necessarily belong in the sort of typical places where bands could play back then, which was like nightclubs on the Sunset Strip, who didn't give a shit about anything to do with creativity at that point. Maybe when the Doors were there and Captain Beefheart, but that was way before our time. And so I just really started out just finding little warehouse spaces and stuff like that to put on gigs, charge, low entry fee, and the cops would still show up and they would still shut the place down. And, so even as far away from, the kind of commercialized areas that we were, like in downtown LA and stuff, which then was very abandoned, it is a lot different now. But anyway, so it hit me that, I was driving with some friends through Mexico, through the desert, listening to some Public Image Limited and Savage Republic, which was one of my favorite bands at the time. And they kind of had a mix of like post-punk with kind of like spaghetti western Morricone music. And I was just like, this is where this music should be playing, not in the kind of, typical bar with, beer, left over from the night before on the floor. And so, not that I haven't put in plenty of time in those places, but anyway, so when I came back, we started organizing these events. And at first it was just like 150 people, 3 school buses, just taking them out onto this dry lake bed. It was the Minutemen, who were just down for anything. One of the most amazing bands, I think, of all time. And Savage Republic. And there was no headliner. It was more just like, come on out, check it out. And then that led to a couple other desert events, led to one on a whale watch boat going around San Pedro Harbor with the Minutemen and the Meat Puppets. Eventually we did one with Sonic Youth, Red Cross, again with the Meat Puppets. And then there was one that was kind of like almost took it out of the realm of just music, let's say, because it was Einstürzen and Neubauten, and I don't know, people are familiar with them, but at the time there were these guys from Berlin that played power tools and road leveling equipment with contact mics hooked up to it, and it was noisy, but it was also really kind of like this ritualistic kind of intense thing. Yeah. And then as their opening act, we had Survival Research Laboratories, which is a whole story in its own right. Some of that stuff, they at that time, they were doing kind of robotic performance things with like dead animal parts hooked up and, using remote control type of things. In this case, they didn't bring all that stuff. They just found some refrigerators out in the desert, brought some black powder and blew the shit out of them. The whole thing worked. It was very, could have been scary. It probably was for the people that were tripping, but it was also very to me, it was kind of an ultimate performance thing.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, the whole thing, it really transcends, like you said, the idea of the club, the bar. I've done like art shows and stuff like that and played in bars, but the thing that I didn't like is you have this inherent distraction. So you're not one-on-one, and putting them out there in the desert is a fantastic idea because there's nothing around but you and the experience and that interaction. Just to let everybody know, Desolation Center is not just an idea and a how do I put it? It's also a documentary that Stuart has put together, which has documented this very well. We're going to be seeing some of that a little bit later. So what did the bands think of this, bringing these guys out?
Well, I mean, I think it was different for different people, right? So like Bruce Leischer, who was one of the founders of Savage Republic, I mean, I guess he grew up going out with his dad to dry lake beds, and I think his dad was like one of those glider guys that and so he knew more about like where we could put on a show and things like that. So when I had an idea like, hey, what do you think about playing out in the desert? And he was like, yeah, we can do this. Whereas with the Minutemen, they came from the harbor, which is a whole different vibe. And I didn't really realize this till later when I was working on the documentary, and I got to interview Mike Watt, who I knew then, but I hadn't really talked to him about all the aspects. And he was like, me and D Boone, like, we've never seen the desert before. Like, so we were just like, well, this is really cool. Like, we got to come back out here and like camp or something. Like it was. Yeah. But I think a lot of the LA people actually, even though I knew you could drive out to the desert in a couple hours, I think a lot of people just didn't. So for them, it was kind of like being on another planet. So I think everybody had a different reaction to it. I mean, one person we haven't really talked about, Perry Farrell, who went on to do, obviously, Jane's Addiction, but also Lollapalooza.
Right.
He was originally from Florida, so he didn't really know that much about the desert, but he was one of our ticket takers. So like everything was volunteer, everybody was, friends of friends and so on. And he was in a band with a couple friends of mine called Psycom before Jane's Addiction. And so I think he also really was paying attention to everything that was going on, this micro.
Clearly.
Yeah.
I mean, he went on to start.
What did the bands think? It's like, I think everybody came at it with a different perspective. Everybody came away from it. The Meat Puppets, I think when they did get to play out in the desert, it was like, fuck yeah, this is where our music belongs.
Yeah.
Because they're from Arizona and they were.
As am I.
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right. Did you see them like a few times?
I've seen them a couple times in
Yeah.
Arizona when I was younger. I was like 13, 14, sneaking into places that were 18 and older because they weren't very kind to the younger generation. But I was a little rough around the edges, so I could get right in. It was no big deal.
Well, it's interesting. Like at the time when we did the second, third desert show, it was the second Meat Puppets one called Gila Monster Jamboree, because the first one they did was on the boat in the harbor. They were like, turn the lights out, and it was a full moon because it was the first.
Yeah.
And we knew that we were planning to do it on full moon. It was January 5th. It just so happened that it was the first. It didn't just so happen. I mean, it was the first time Sonic Youth played even on the entire West Coast.
Wow.
And that was because Kim Gordon's family, she grew up here in LA, and Kim and Thurston were visiting for Christmas. So I was like, well, let's pick the first full moon after Christmas. And so that's how that all came together. It was cold. I mean, that was the one thing about that.
I know, the desert's deceiving because even in the middle of winter, it looks hot.
Right.
But then you get out there, there's nothing blocking the wind. And it can get bitter cold.
I think even just when the sun goes down, you just don't have any atmosphere. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? So
it's then and about 4 o'clock in the morning, right before the sun comes on, and it's cold.
But the wind was an issue with our first gig because we were out on a dry lake bed. It was completely flat, and it was just blowing. And so the sound guy, Ed Serino, figured out, well, we could have a windbreak if we park the buses like, in a sort of a triangular shape.
Right.
And so that's how it ended up to be, is that we had the buses. We weren't originally planning it that way, but it's like, it was that or, forget it.
Yeah.
You were going to hear anything.
When I watched the documentary Desolation Center, I was blown away because this, like what we had talked about earlier, this is what people need to know can still happen. You don't have to have 1 million people there. It can be close, it can be personal. And out of something that was just like, hey, this sounds like a good idea, everybody that walked away basically said it was a spiritual thing. You know what I mean? So would you say that this played a little part into what later became like Burning Man?
I guess I learned in the course of making the documentary, and even at the beginning, I was like, okay, I'm working on this film. And then this guy from Vice magazine contacted me, and he goes, well, somebody up in San Francisco says you did these desert shows. I forget what he knew about it, but he was like, tell me about it. And he goes, oh, if they're going to run this article, I got to tie it into like Burning Man somehow. And I'm like, it could be a stretch, Yeah. But I did know this guy named John Law from my Amuck bookstore days, and he was sort of a founder of what this great group of people called the Cacophony Society that did all kinds of crazy events, performances, just in-your-face stuff in the city. But he also took that concept out to the playa where everything happens. And that's another whole long story, but I was like, maybe John Law could help you with this. Anyway, turns out after we did the Survival Research Laboratories show with Einstürzen Neubauten, he joined Survival Research Laboratories, and he would bring his neon art and they'd blow that up as part of these shows. And they told him about the time that they did the show in the desert.
Yeah.
So now we're talking about like mid 80s, and he's like, that's a good idea. We could do something with that concept. So now I realize that there's a very clear connection to Burning Man. And in the early days of Burning Man, it was also small. It was also like just really doing it for the people that were there, as opposed to like, let's create this big thing where we can all be on Instagram and Silicon Valley people fly in and blah, blah, blah. It sounds horrible now, but the original thing, was very cool, and I just think that's something for people to be aware of, is that things don't have to go to shit, but there is that tendency if. See,
and I think you did it right. You let something grow just enough, and then you clipped it at its beautiful point before it could grow into an ugly, overgrown garden. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You kind of cut it just right, because that's the thing. People go on and on and on with stuff, and the longer they go, the more the word gets out, the bigger it is, and the money starts drawing them in. They're like, "Ooh, I can make a lot of money," but that then comes problems, then comes falsities, and it loses its artistic, spiritual happening. So when people walk away, they're not walking away with the same feeling that it was originated on. So I think you did a great job at that.
Well, I actually, I was looking at these things as being more spontaneous. Like, oh, well, here's an opportunity. Einstürzen Neubauten is coming to LA. Maybe we can get him to go out to the desert.
Right.
Or, and actually it was sort of the reverse, where I met them in Berlin and I said, hey, if you ever are in LA, we should do a desert show. And almost forgot until I got a phone call like, we're going to be in LA in 2 weeks. Like,
right.
You get this show together. But I guess my point is that I didn't see it as this annual thing that everybody gets ready for,
Right.
and it never occurred to me.
It was a show.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. You're not booking them for a venue, you're booking them for the desert.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. And I do think that I did sincerely believe that, making something bigger was not going to make it better. I mean, these were, to me, the coolest bands, the ones that I wanted to work with. And not that many people knew that they existed then. Some of them went on to be pretty, important in the whole, whatever rock story, etc. But I think, and they deserve that. But at the same time, I think a lot of times when something's only appealing to 50 people, that's really cool, and that's not something to be, looked down upon.
No, every band that has played with you, I have listened to all of them since I was preteen. You know what I mean? It's funny you mentioned Perry Farrell. I just did an interview with Martin King. He's part of a group that he's put together called Dog Tablet. And when we were doing the interview, it's such a small world. He was like, one of the crowning achievements besides being with Pigface and Test Department is when I went on tour with Jane's Addiction and played with him. And it really blows my mind. He's in the UK, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I just see this huge circle of the same minds kind of cycling through. So it's like, I feel like an outsider looking in this bubble of all the cool people going, wow, hey, they got so many great stories. So I appreciate it. I really do.
Well, Test Department was definitely the industry. I mean, they were definitely in the vein of what that whole era of, what Einstürzen Neubauten.
Could you imagine if they played with Neubauten? Oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh, that would be fucking amazing. I'm a little curious about, off the top of my head, I'm horrible with remembering. The guy with the robots, that whole conglomerate.
Mark Pauline, Survival.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, that had to add an element. I mean, I saw the explosions and I saw people's reactions, but I mean, wow. I mean, that had to have just brought a whole nother element that people were like, we can't do this in a fucking venue, but we can out here.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it was definitely it took you out of your whatever everyday reality. I think explosions, there's something kind of just cool about it as a means of expression, and that's what they wanted to do. And I think it could be looked at as, sort of pushing the envelope of what can you do without hurting people in an environment. But nobody got hurt, and I think everybody used common sense. But I also think that there was definitely sort of we're never going to go to a gig with an opening band that blows up refrigerators. It's just,
exactly.
Once in a lifetime thing. And then Einstürzen Neubauten, kind of just segued right out of that into something else that was very, primal and just had that much energy that it worked as an opening act. It didn't overshadow what they did.
I mean, if you stand back at this point, from what I was seeing, the way it was laid out, it's here we are, we don't know our atmosphere, boom, out of your comfort zone, straight into metal banging, and set the mode for the evening. I mean, that could not have been planned out any fucking better. I mean, like, that is a mental transformation from point A to point B.
Right. No, it's a really interesting point, because again, I guess because I was in the middle of it all, kind of just trying to make sure things happened and some kind of a sequence, but like Aaron, who was the drummer of Perry's band at the time, Psycom, when I interviewed him, and he actually played out in the desert with Perry in a later show. He was like, that was like, it just completely cleared my mind. These explosions happened, and I just went into this other place, and I'm like, that is so cool, because I wasn't even thinking that. I was just sort of like, oh, that explosion happened, but I mean, he was like, wow, that just put me into this other zone. So yeah, it's just, everybody had their own sort of way of processing all this stuff.
This is the beauty of Destiny. Having an open mind, feeling what you need to do. I don't know how many things I've gone into with one idea and came out on the other side like, wow, I had no idea. That's what I was providing. I was seriously trying to make some money or just do something cool. Yeah. And then on the other side, people walk away with a whole nother vision. And when I saw that, it just, I am so impressed. I literally feel like I'm eating the table scraps from innovation. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I was born in '79, and I listened to really good music young all the way up till now. But the thing is I wasn't even old enough to go experience these things.
Well, one thing I always think about is that my age, when we were doing these shows, like Woodstock was 1969, so it was already over a decade earlier, but there was always this idea that, oh, you should have been there, by the hippie generation, because, it was so groovy and how do you compete with, Jimi Hendrix or whatever, but at the same time, I wanted to do something that could be for our generation, but not the whole generation, but I mean, in a small way that didn't have to have all these people and the highways being shut down and all that, and it was more just like in the scale of the do-it-yourself punk rock spirit, so
you accomplished it, my friend. You accomplished it very well.
Back in the 80s, we put on parties in the desert, and we called ourselves Desolation Center.
Is the punk movement part of the Nazi movement?
No, that's the police. That's the Nazi movement.
The early 80s was a time of experimentation and rebellion.
The LAPD freaked out about punk rock like it was the second coming of the Black Panthers.
I started thinking I need to apply some of the out-of-the-box punk rock thinking. Why couldn't we put this kind of really cool music into this desert environment? How many things could go wrong,
I immediately understood the element of danger and the element of feeling alive are actually connected.
Everything that I found exciting at the time, all here in this remote spot.
Total anarchy. That desert environment is awesome for acts of freedom.
Desolation Center was one of the inspirations when we started doing Burning Man.
It was beyond a theory, it was made real. This gig makes total sense.
And I just remember thinking, this is transformative. Those shows reflected that spirit of, I'm going to make it happen.
It was definitely one of those doors that opens and you're kind of different on the other side.
I was kind of hoping to see the hillside come down on everybody, but that's my disappointment.
So another thing that I was wondering, Amok Books, what's that all about? I know I've had a couple.
Cool.
Pan's
Yeah,
Ram, a bunch of the Dahlia books. I mean, how did that all start?
Yeah, so I have to say one of the people in the Desolation Center film that you will see is a guy named Vale from Research Publications up in San Francisco, and he started out with a zine. He used to work at City Lights bookstore, which people may be familiar with, the original Beat place. So he's kind of this link of the Beat era with punk rock. He, was involved in the early San Francisco scene, and he was also in Blue Cheer, which
He was in Blue Cheer?
yeah, in an early
Yeah, it's like early prog rock kind of.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I hope I'm not giving the wrong band. Anyway, we might have to fix that. So Vale did a book called the Industrial Culture Handbook, which was a big inspiration. It was right around the same time as I was doing the Desolation Center shows, and they had people like Throbbing Gristle, Mark Pauline from Survival Research Laboratory, Monty Kazaza. They would interview them, and then they would put these lists of sort of like their things that inspired them, like all their favorite books, films. Back then it would be films on video, VHS or whatever. And I just, with my friends here in LA, we would just scour it, what is this? Wow, I've never heard of, or maybe you heard of William Burroughs, but you never read him or whatever, or didn't understand why you should be interested. So anyway, we kind of wrapped our heads around all that, combined with some other sources that were there was a libertarian book catalog called Limpanics that would have, just stuff that shouldn't really exist. How do you make crystal meth? Things like that. And so it was a combination of the more arty, radical culture stuff with the kind of just anarchism of the Limpanics catalog, but also being able to get this information, because back then, and I know you're gonna have to use your imagination here, some of you people, but there was no internet, there were no websites, you didn't just look it up on your phone.
I kind of miss it.
We had to work hard to find this shit, and it made it really exciting when you did, whether it was at a thrift store or you got a package in the mail,
Well, it was the journey. It's the journey, and it sticks with you longer, because I don't remember half the shit I would look at online, but back then, hell, if I don't remember every book I went and searched for, album, movie, you know what I mean? You got to go on a journey. You got to do research. So that list had to be like a mental treasure trove of knowledge, where you're just oh, so much good stuff to find out.
Absolutely. And so anyway, what Amok, we thought, well, let's have a bookstore and a video store with all this cool stuff that we've learned about. And then we're like, oh, we don't really have the money to do that yet. So we decided to make a catalog, a little thin book catalog that we called the Amok First Dispatch. And it was kind of a way for us to also make it an art project. We collaged together all kinds of images that we found and from old magazines, and sort of did a Dada thing. So it was a book catalog, but it was also kind of like a guide to all kinds of extreme and unusual information. That was kind of what it all came together. And so it was, psychedelic reality like Timothy Leary, but it was also, conspiracy theories, true crime. We had forensic pathology books back when, those were only sold to people that were actually, crime scene investigators and doctors and stuff like that.
That's literally half the books that I used to have on my shelf. And I say used to because divorce, this, that, and the other. But half the books on there were Amok Books Publishing. I was like, when you said that, I was like, holy shit, man.
So just to fast forward a little bit. Eventually, we did have a bookstore, and we did start publishing books. And the bookstore in LA really became kind of a meeting place for all kinds of outsiders and weirdos, and you would probably, feel right at home. So it was a cool thing, and I did it for 10 years. And one of the authors that we published, John Gilmore, was completely LA born and bred, grew up in Silver Lake, went to Hollywood High, and he got obsessed with these certain things, Charles Manson, the Black Dahlia. And so I ended up being really the first publisher of the first full-length book about the Black Dahlia case, or we did as among books. It's a fantastic book. It's called Severed, and he's just a really, really intense writer.
It's a great book.
Yeah.
It is. I have a morgue photo of her tattooed on my shoulder.
Oh,
Elizabeth
wow.
Yeah. Everyone's like, "Is that Leatherface?" And I was like, "No, it's my aunt." And they're like, Why is she all messed up?" "Oh, it's her morgue photo." And they're like, "What the fuck's wrong with you?"
Yeah.
So if you don't mind me asking,
wait, I want to know, like, what inspired you to get the Black Dahlia morgue photo as
I'm a sick fuck. I've always been fascinated with the different ways that the mind can take. I mean, it absolutely, human nature disgusts me and absolutely intrigues me. And these people just get written off as, you're fucked up, or even her. Well, that's what you get for going to Hollywood, being a whore. Well, not really. People get put in positions in life where either they don't have a choice, or they think, or they move, or they feel differently than others. And I can relate to that. So, I mean, I got Charles Manson tattooed on me. I got John Wayne Gacy, and everyone's like, "Well, John Wayne Gacy used to rape little boys." And I was like, that's not why I got him. "Well, why'd you get him?" "Because he fucking made clowns scary again. And I got to give him credit." Charles Manson.
One of the things we did at the bookstore in the early days was a John Wayne Gacy clown painting art show.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. We had Pogo and and the Seven Dwarves digging the.
Yeah. There was this weird little place, and I can't even remember the fucking name of it. It was in Phoenix, Arizona, and it was very short-lived. But they did serial killer art shows where they had like Ramirez's on it, John Wayne Gacy, and then they made prints that you could buy and all this stuff. It was pretty intriguing.
Well, my friends JD and Kathy, I don't know if they were in San Diego, but they started the Museum of Death, which is here in Hollywood, and they were actually some of the first people to help me out with funding for Desolation Center, and they kind of go back to the same scene of industrial music and throbbing gristle and all that stuff like that. But it all started as a very tiny thing where you pay $3 and you get to see some serial killer art in an old morgue in downtown San Diego. So but I think there's an Arizona connection there.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what the fuck it was called. I just remember the first time I walked into this joint, because Phoenix doesn't have a whole lot. You know what I mean? When I was a teenager, there was cool little spots like Thought Crime and Metropophobia, these little art spots, where I'm cruising around downtown. I got my mohawk, I'm drinking a 40, looking to start a fight. And then I hear weird shit happen and see all these like Andy Warhol types. And I was like, it's 2:00 in the fucking morning. This has got to be good. So I would just walk in and ended up making some really good friends because of it. So I feel like we're missing that nowadays. You know what I mean? But that's venturing off on other realms.
Sure.
Do you mind if I ask about another documentary?
Absolutely not. I mean, go for it.
Please smack me in the balls next time you see me if I get this wrong. Better Living by Circuitry? Is that
Through
proper?
Circuitry.
Through Circuitry. Tell me a little bit about that.
So I was doing the bookstore for a number of years, and I really always had this interest in documentary film, music documentaries. Kind of had thought maybe the Desolation Center thing would have come together as a documentary around the time that we were doing the shows, and I just didn't have the skills or I didn't really know how to do it. And then a friend of mine, John Reese, he used to do the Survival Research Laboratories documentaries.
Right.
And a lot of people may have seen those if they haven't been to the actual performances. And he was like, yeah, I'm doing this techno documentary. And I guess around that time in the late 90s, I just got interested in that scene. And Dan, who used to also be part of the Amok Bookstore, was like listening to what's now EDM music. And we all went and saw like a big rave kind of thing with Crystal Method and I forget who else on New Year's Eve. And I was like, this is a really cool scene. Like, there's things about this that I really like. And I'm like, John, are you still doing that techno documentary? And he goes, yeah, do you want to help me out with it? So that's kind of where I came into it. And basically, what I learned was that, a lot of the people, at least in Southern California and probably elsewhere as well, came out of punk rock and came out of industrial music, and they had that DIY spirit of making your own flyers, putting on your own shows. The interesting thing to me was that the DJs weren't stars back then. The DJs were like creating the vibe, creating the music.
Yeah.
But there was no central focus, which I thought was really cool. And then also there was desert parties, which we ended up filming at. One of the groups in the film, Electric Sky Church, played, with the sun coming up. And so that kind of, brought back that sensibility for me as well. So it's really a snapshot of American rave culture in that period of the late 90s. But it's, it's like also the people who made the flyers, also the people who promoted the shows. And then we also interviewed people that were electronic, music people, DJs, Ronnie Size, who did drum and bass, even one of the original Kraftwerk guys that made the first, electronic drum kit, drum machine.
That's cool.
So, yeah, that's kind of what that was all about. And I think,
it's amazing, putting the two side by side. You got punk kids over here, but then you got the hippies from the 60s, and then you got the rave kids, and you put this all together. And what it is just creative types finding basically a rip in the time continuum to say, we're going to create our own world.
Right.
Even if it's for one night, we're going to create our own world where everything else doesn't exist and you could just let go, just be free. And I have to say, we need that more now than ever, but like everybody's got to capitalize. So it kind of takes the piss out of the fun, So I'm hoping there's another big boom where a bunch of kids get together and say, fuck it. We don't even want to make money. Let's just make it happen.
I mean, like if you look at like Electric Daisy Carnival, I mean, in Nevada, I think it's, I don't know how many 100,000 people. That started as one of these warehouse parties in downtown LA, right? So there's always going to be a few people that can take these things and go all the way and make them into big commercial things, but most of us are not going to.
Right.
I mean, it's just statistically impossible. So I think something to be thinking about is what's actually going to be more satisfying to me as a person and to my friends and the people that I respect. Maybe it's something small that's, like you said, that changes our life for that one night, or that one day out in the desert or whatever it is. Because, if you can do that, I think you've accomplished a lot. And that's something that we can all kind of aspire to,
Yeah. I know just doing this show, I mean, it's small. It's on YouTube. Not a lot of people watch it. It gets around, but the people that are truly paying attention, because it's not a small group of friends. It's literally out there for whoever the fuck wants to pay attention to it. But the feedback, when somebody says something you said triggered something else, made a change, it makes it all worthwhile. So that small, intimate feel of what you're doing, literally those little steps can accomplish so much more, you know? You never know where it's going to spawn off to.
Yeah, and I think that is something that's different about the time that we're in, is that you can connect with people through, you know, something like Instagram or YouTube or whatever.
Right.
And they can be really important in your life, and they don't have
Yeah.
to geographically be near you. But I think there's also the price that you pay is that you're not near the people,
Right.
you know, and so it's striking that balance of.
Yeah. And the thing that sucks about that, which I have found, is I have been called an emotional vampire. Now, I think that's funny, but it's kind of true because I can pick up on other people's emotion without them talking. You know, I can pick up on how they're feeling, and you don't get that. You know what I mean? So I have to try to read eye language and the way people type things. You know, and it's a whole nother realm that I'm not used to, that I'm slowly picking up on, but it's just not the same. You know, we've got such separation nowadays, but at the same time, we're talking right now.
Yeah,
You
I
know?
mean, when we started talking, I'm like, wow, this guy gets it. He's on a wavelength that, you know, mentally, and your life experiences and whatever, you know, you're perceiving the stuff that I'm putting out in the world, and like, you know, I didn't need to explain it. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
It's the searcher that,
Right.
like I was describing earlier to you last time we talked, the searcher and the sitter. The sitter has no fucking clue. They just keep looking at the revolution, sitting there going, wow, I wish I could get off. Wow, I wish I could get off. Wow, I wish I could get off. The searcher says, why the fuck don't we? So they get off and they look and they're like, well, that's fucking boring. I need to explore. I need to know something different. And some are content. They end up making good money and they die miserable. And then the searcher, it doesn't fucking matter because it's all about the journey. They're not looking for death. They're not looking for life. They're just looking for the experience, knowing, feeling, and connecting with the others. You know, it's, you walk into a bar, there's 200 people. You could see a dude that you've never met in your life across the bar and walk up to him and your conversation starts like it never stopped. You know what I mean? It just,
Sure.
it's happening. There's no, hi, how are you? It's, you just start the conversation and it's comfortable. And that's when you know. We see each other from across the way. And maybe we're the fucking aliens, who knows?
I'd like to think so. Yeah.
Oh, by the way, my buddy Rex, who got me over to you,
Yes.
to clear up where you met him.
Okay.
You met him at Itch.io.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Rex Blatter.
Yeah. Okay.
You met
thank
him
you.
there.
Yeah, no, and that's an amazing
Oh my God.
entity. Yeah.
That
For
whole
sure.
thing
No,
with the drums and the oh my God. The first
Yeah.
time my buddy sent that over to me, I was like, this is fucking amazing.
Yeah.
You know, it's
They
almost
really
like
are doing something that no one else is doing. I mean,
Right.
You know, with this whole kind of like insane drum line.
Right.
You know, Dia de los Muertos.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
And the first video I saw was linked in with Meow Wolf. And I have to say,
Okay.
good for them, because Meow Wolf, Jesus Christ, man, like, they're growing. And I mean, they are literally making these entire immersive art pieces that are like little amusement parks that you can walk through the artist's ideas.
So Meow Wolf is still there? It's still existing?
I'm not sure if they have multiple ones now. It's not just one. So
Okay.
there's one that I'm going to in Santa Fe, New Mexico in October. I know there was one in LA. I think they opened one up in Nevada. So they're spreading because it's picking up. I mean,
I've never been to one either, but
I haven't yet either, but everything I've seen, I'm just like, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
That's what I try to do
Right.
with the bus, but I ain't got 5 people helping me. So, you know,
No excuses.
well, listen,
Yeah, no, I love what, you know, like, I guess the, you know, formal word is like outsider art environments, you know, where you go
Yeah.
somewhere and somebody's like created their own world, you know,
Right.
on the side of the road. And yeah.
kind of like you did out in the desert.
Yeah. But,
You know?
but like they live there.
Right, right. Listen, it has been absolutely fucking amazing talking to you, Stuart, and I hope we talk more in the future. There's so many more questions I want to ask, but I literally don't want to take up your entire night going, so what was it like traveling to Berlin? You know, did you eat any good food along the way?
Yeah. Well,
talking to people like yourself is kind of like when you guys found the list of all the things that these people liked and knew about. It opens up my mind, and I'm glad that I got to interview you so everyone else can listen to that and get some ideas, you know, because we can do this. We can change our atmosphere and our friends' atmosphere, and who knows where it goes from there. So I thank you very much for being you.
Thank you, man. Thank you for giving me a chance to connect with you and talk about the things that,
Hey, the pleasure was all mine, seriously. So, listen, that was another episode of Zounds from the Flip Side, and we've been talking to Stuart Swezey, a man on the move and somebody you have to know. So, farewell from the doctor. You got any last words, Stuart?
The doctor can heal you.
Oh!